The day I received the certified letter from the Pinewood Springs Homeowners Association, I was standing on my roof, admiring the new solar panel array that had just been installed across my property in Bend, Oregon. 3,000 square feet of gleaming photovoltaic cells that would finally make my home energy independent after years of planning and saving. I had no idea that those panels would spark a war that would literally shut down power to half the neighborhood. My name is Yannick Grayson, and I have lived at 4782 Ridgeline Drive for the past 8 years. The property is unique in our subdivision because it sits on what was originally a 5-acre parcel that predates the HOA by nearly 40 years. When the developers came through in the early 2000s and carved up the surrounding land into quarter-acre lots, my property remained intact because my grandfather had owned it outright since 1968. He built the original cabin here, and when he passed, he left it to me. The HOA formed around me, not the other way around, which would become a critical detail in everything that followed. I tore open the envelope right there on the roof, shielding my eyes from the late September sun. The letter was printed on expensive cream-colored cardstock, with the HOA logo embossed at the top. It read, "Dear Mr. Grayson, it has come to our attention that you have installed solar panels on your property without seeking architectural approval from the Pinewood Springs HOA Architectural Review Committee. This is a direct violation of Article 7, Section 3 of our CC and Articles, which requires all exterior modifications to be submitted for review 30 days prior to installation. You are hereby fined $500 per day until the panels are removed or relocated to an area not visible from any public street or neighboring property. Payment is due within 15 days. Regards, Patricia Hallbrook, HOA President." I read it 3 times, my blood pressure rising with each pass. $500 per day. The panels had been up for a week already. That was $3,500 and counting. I climbed down from the roof, my boots hitting the gravel driveway with more force than necessary. This was insane. I had checked every document when I bought the place. My property was grandfathered in. I had attended exactly 1 HOA meeting in 8 years, and that was only because they were threatening to tow my truck for parking it in my own driveway overnight. That meeting had taught me everything I needed to know about Patricia Hallbrook and her little kingdom. Patricia was exactly what you would expect from an HOA president drunk on the minuscule amount of power that came with the position. She was in her mid-50s, drove a white Lexus SUV with a vanity plate that read Roulemeter, and had never met a regulation she did not want to enforce with maximum prejudice. She wore her blonde hair in an aggressive bob that somehow looked sharp enough to cut glass, and her entire wardrobe seemed to consist of various pastel cardigans and khaki pants. But it was her eyes that really told the story. They were the eyes of someone who measured their self-worth by how many of their neighbors they could make miserable in any given week. I went inside and pulled out the thick folder containing all my property documents. The deed was clear. My parcel was described with metes and bounds that predated the subdivision plat. More importantly, buried in the paperwork from when the HOA was formed, there was a specific exclusion for pre-existing properties. I was not legally bound by their covenants, conditions, and restrictions. They had tried to get my grandfather to sign on voluntarily back in 2003, but he had told them, in his characteristically blunt way, to go pound sand. The next morning, I drove to the HOA management office, which was located in a small business park on the east side of Bend. Patricia ran the HOA like it was her full-time job, even though it was technically a volunteer position. She had set up an actual office with regular hours, business cards, and a secretary named Jennifer, who always looked like she would rather be anywhere else. "I need to speak with Patricia," I said, dropping the letter on Jennifer's desk. Jennifer glanced at it and winced. "She's expecting you. Go right in." Patricia's office was decorated like a lawyer's waiting room, all dark wood and leather furniture that was probably meant to intimidate. She sat behind her desk with her hands folded, a tight smile on her face that did not reach her eyes. "Mr. Grayson, thank you for coming in so promptly. I assume you are here to discuss payment arrangements for your fine." "I am here to tell you that I am not paying a dime," I said, remaining standing. "My property is not subject to your CC and Artiques. It predates the HOA, and there is a specific exemption in the formation documents." Her smile did not waver. "I am afraid you are mistaken. All properties within the Pinewood Springs subdivision boundaries are subject to our covenants. When you purchased the property, you assumed all associated obligations. That is not how property law works, and you know it. I have the deed right here. My grandfather never signed your agreement, and neither did I. Then you will have the opportunity to make that argument in small claims court," Patricia said, her voice dripping with condescension. "In the meantime, the fines will continue to accrue. I should also inform you that if payment is not received within 30 days, we will place a lien on your property." I felt my jaw tighten. "You cannot lien my property for a debt that does not exist. We will see what the judge says. Now, if you will excuse me, I have a meeting with the landscaping committee." I left the office furious but not defeated. I spent the rest of that day on the phone with 3 different real estate attorneys. The consensus was unanimous. I was right on the law. The HOA had no authority over my property, but enforcing that would require going to court, which meant time and money. The cheapest estimate I got was $5,000 in legal fees, and that was if Patricia did not drag things out. That night, I sat on my back deck watching the sun set over the Cascade Mountains, thinking about my options. The solar panels were not just a luxury or an environmental statement. They were part of a larger plan. My property, with its 5 acres and pre-subdivision status, had something else that made it unique. Running directly through the western edge of my land was an electrical easement that carried the main power distribution line for the entire Pinewood Springs development. When the power company had run the lines in 2004, they had negotiated the easement with my grandfather, who had agreed to it for a one-time payment of $15,000 and a promise that he could tap into it for free electricity for life. My grandfather had never bothered to take advantage of that agreement. He was old school and preferred his generator. But when I inherited the property, the power company had honored the arrangement. I had it all in writing. Better yet, the easement agreement included a clause that gave my grandfather and his successors the right to revoke the easement with 90 days written notice if the power company, or any beneficiary of the easement, engaged in activities that materially interfered with the use and enjoyment of the property. I pulled out the easement documents and read them carefully by flashlight as the evening turned to night. The language was broad. Materially interfered was not defined. The agreement had been written by a lawyer my grandfather had hired, not by the power company, and they had apparently agreed to it because they needed the easement quickly to meet their construction deadlines. An idea began to form. It was petty. It was probably going to make me the most hated person in the neighborhood. But it was also completely legal. The next morning, I called Pacific Power and asked to speak with someone about easement agreements. After being transferred 4 times, I ended up with a property rights manager named Douglas Chen. "Mr. Grayson, I am looking at the easement now," Douglas said. "This is a very unusual agreement. May I ask what your concern is?" "I am considering revoking the easement." I wanted to understand the process and the implications. There was a long pause. "Sir, are you aware that this easement services approximately 140 homes? If you revoke it, we would need to find an alternative route for the power lines, which would be extremely expensive and time-consuming. Those homes would be without power during the transition. How long would that transition take? Best case scenario, 6 months. More realistically, 9 to 12 months, given permitting and construction requirements. We would need to negotiate easements with multiple other property owners, and there is no guarantee we could even find a viable alternative route. Some of those homes might need to be serviced from a completely different substation. But I have the legal right to revoke it, according to this agreement, yes, with 90 days' notice. But Mr. Grayson, I have to ask why you would want to do this. Is there a problem with the lines? Are they interfering with your property in some way? The HOA has been harassing me, I said, fining me for improvements to my own property. It is materially interfering with my use and enjoyment of my land. Douglas exhaled slowly. Sir, I understand you are frustrated, but this seems like an extreme response. Have you considered mediation with the HOA? I have considered hiring lawyers and spending thousands of dollars to defend rights I already have. This seems more efficient. Mr. Grayson, I am going to be honest with you. If you do this, the backlash is going to be intense. Your neighbors are going to blame you, not the HOA. The HOA will probably sue you. This could turn into a nightmare. They have already threatened to lien my property. It is already a nightmare. Can you send me the formal revocation process? I will email you the information, but please think very carefully about this. Once you submit that notice, there is no easy way to undo it. I thanked him and hung up. The email arrived within an hour. The process was simple. Written notice to Pacific Power and to all beneficiaries of the easement. 90 days minimum. I opened a blank document and started typing. That afternoon, I hand-delivered a copy of the revocation notice to Patricia at the HOA office. Jennifer saw me coming and actually stood up like she was going to try to intercept me, but I walked right past her desk. Patricia looked up from her computer, her expression already hardening. Mr. Grayson, you need to make an appointment. I dropped the notice on her desk. Consider this your 90-day notice that I am revoking the electrical easement across my property. Effective December 15th, the power line serving the Pinewood Springs subdivision will need to be removed from my land. She picked up the document and scanned it, her face going pale and then flushing red. You cannot do this. That easement is permanent. Read the agreement. It is not. I am exercising my legal right to revoke it due to the HOA's continued harassment and interference with my property rights. This is extortion. Her voice rose sharply. You are trying to blackmail us into dropping the fines. No, this is me protecting my property. You threatened to lien my house over solar panels that I have every right to install. You started this fight. I am just choosing the battlefield. Do you have any idea how many people you will hurt? Families with children, elderly residents who need power for medical equipment. This is monstrous. Then I suggest you drop the fines and put in writing that my property is exempt from your CC and RTCS. You have 90 days to figure it out. I turned and walked out while she was still sputtering. Jennifer stared at me with wide eyes as I passed her desk. I could hear Patricia shouting into her phone before I even made it to the parking lot. My phone started ringing 20 minutes after I got home. I did not recognize the number, so I let it go to voicemail. Then another call, and another. I turned off the ringer and went out to work in my garden. By evening, I had 37 missed calls and my email inbox was flooded with messages. Some were angry, many were confused. A few were threatening. The next day, I got a visit from the police. 2 officers in a patrol car pulled into my driveway around 10 in the morning. I was expecting this, so I had all my documents ready. "Mr. Grayson," the taller officer said. He had a name tag that read Officer Martinez. "We received several calls about a dispute with your HOA. Can you tell us what is going on?" I invited them in and walked them through everything. The solar panels, the fines, the property exemption, and the easement revocation. I showed them all the paperwork. They took their time reading through it. "This is a civil matter," Officer Martinez said finally. "You have not broken any laws, but I have to tell you, people are really upset. The HOA called this in as extortion and harassment. I am exercising a legal property right. If the HOA wants to resolve this, they know what they need to do." "Is there anything illegal about what he is doing?" the shorter officer, Officer Diaz, asked his partner. "Not that I can see. It is all documented. The easement agreement is valid and it includes a revocation clause." Martinez looked at me. "But you should know, this is going to get worse before it gets better. I would recommend getting a lawyer if you have not already." "I have made some calls," I said. "I am covered." They left, and I watched them stop at Patricia's house, 3 doors down, before they drove away. Patricia lived in one of the larger homes in the subdivision, a sprawling craftsman-style place with a manicured lawn that probably violated several water conservation ordinances. I wondered what she was telling them. The first HOA emergency meeting was called for that Saturday. I received the notice via email, along with a strongly worded message that my attendance was mandatory. I showed up at the community center at 7 in the evening and found the parking lot completely full. Cars lined the street. This was going to be interesting. Inside, every chair was occupied and people were standing along the walls. I counted maybe 120 people in a room designed for 70. The temperature was already stifling. Patricia stood at the front behind a folding table with a microphone and a gavel. When I walked in, the room went quiet and heads turned. I could feel the hostility radiating off people in waves. I found a spot along the back wall and leaned against it with my arms crossed. Patricia's voice crackled through the cheap speaker system. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice. As you all know, we are facing an unprecedented crisis. One of our residents has threatened to shut off power to the entire community over a minor dispute about solar panels." "Minor dispute," I called out. "You fine me $500 a day," the crowd erupted. Half the people started shouting at me. The other half started shouting at Patricia. She banged her gavel repeatedly. "Order! Order, Mr. Grayson, you were not called on to speak." "Then maybe you should not misrepresent the situation," I shot back. "I installed solar panels on my own property, which is not subject to your CC and Articus. Your response was to fine me thousands of dollars and threaten to lien my house. The easement revocation is a legal response to harassment." A man in a red flannel shirt stood up. "Legal or not, you are going to put my family in the dark. My daughter needs a CPAP machine to sleep. What is she supposed to do for 6 months without power?" "Talk to your HOA president," I said. I told her exactly what it would take to resolve this. "Drop the fines and acknowledge in writing that my property is exempt." "You are exempt," a woman shouted. "What makes you so special? My property predates the HOA by 40 years. I was never bound by your rules. You can look it up in the public records." Patricia banged her gavel again. "That is a distortion of the facts. All properties in the subdivision boundaries are bound by our covenants. Show me where I signed them," I said calmly. Show me where my grandfather signed them. You cannot, because we never did. You have been trying to enforce rules you have no authority to enforce, and now you are upset that I am pushing back. An older man stood up, leaning on a cane. Son, even if you are legally in the right, this is not the way to handle it. There are families here, kids, disabled folks. You are talking about cutting off power for months. People could die. No one is going to die, I said, though I felt a pang of guilt. The HOA has 90 days to resolve this. That is plenty of time. But I am not going to be bullied into paying illegal fines or giving up my property rights because it is inconvenient for everyone else. The meeting devolved from there. People shouted proposals and accusations. Someone suggested taking up a collection to pay my fines, which I immediately rejected. Another person proposed that the HOA amend the CC and Articus to explicitly exempt my property. But Patricia shot that down, claiming it would set a dangerous precedent. A lawyer who lived in the neighborhood stood up and gave a 5-minute speech about property law that basically confirmed everything I had said, which only made people angrier at me. Finally, Patricia called for a vote on whether to rescind my fines. It failed 58-42. The majority was convinced that giving in to my extortion would embolden other residents to challenge the HOA's authority. I left the meeting to a chorus of boos and angry muttering. Over the next week, things escalated rapidly. Someone spray-painted "Tyrant" on my mailbox in bright red letters. My truck tires were slashed twice. I filed police reports both times, but there were no witnesses and no security camera footage. The local newspaper picked up the story, and suddenly, I was doing phone interviews with reporters who wanted to know why I was holding my neighborhood hostage. I tried to explain my position, but the headlines were brutal. Man threatens to cut power to 140 homes over solar panel dispute. HOA feud turns ugly in Bend subdivision. I also started getting hate mail. Real letters delivered by the Postal Service, full of vitriol and threats. Some were anonymous. Others included return addresses and signatures, like the writer wanted me to know exactly who hated me. One letter from a woman named Carol Winters told me that her elderly mother lived with her and relied on an oxygen concentrator. "If anything happens to my mother because of you, I will make sure you pay," she wrote. That one got to me. I actually looked up Carol's address and drove over there one evening. She answered the door with her arms crossed, her expression cold. "What do you want?" "I wanted you to know that I am not trying to hurt anyone," I said. "Your mother's health is not in danger. The HOA has 90 days, and if they refuse to act, I will make sure Pacific Power prioritizes relocating lines to homes with medical needs." "How generous of you," she said sarcastically. "You could just drop this whole thing." I could, or your HOA president could stop abusing her authority. She started this. And you are using the rest of us as leverage. You are no better than she is. She shut the door in my face. My lawyer, a sharp woman in her early 40s named Rachel Torres, was both amused and concerned when I filled her in on everything. We met at her office in downtown Bend, a converted house with creaky floors and law books stacked on every available surface. "You have really stirred up a hornet's nest," she said, flipping through my documents. "But legally you are rock solid. The easement agreement is ironclad. Patricia Holbrook does not have a leg to stand on with these fines. So why have not they backed down? Pride, fear, power. Pick one." Patricia has spent years building this little empire where she gets to tell people what to do. Admitting that you are exempt undermines all of that. She is gambling that you will fold before the 90 days are up. I am not folding. Rachel leaned back in her chair. "Then you need to prepare for this to get uglier. The HOA will probably sue you to block the easement revocation. They might try to claim that revoking it is an abuse of rights or that the provision is unconscionable. It is a weak argument, but it will tie things up in court. Can they win? Unlikely, but they can delay. And while they are delaying, you are going to be the most unpopular person in Bend. I can live with that. Sure enough, on day 37 of the 90-day notice period, I was served with a lawsuit. The Pinewood Springs Homeowners Association, represented by a law firm out of Portland, was suing me for declaratory relief and an injunction to prevent the easement revocation. Their argument was exactly what Rachel had predicted, that enforcing the revocation clause was an abuse of rights, that the clause itself was unconscionable and should be voided, and that I was acting in bad faith to coerce the HOA into abandoning legitimate fines. Rachel filed a response that systematically demolished their arguments. She pointed out that the easement had been negotiated between sophisticated parties, that the power company had agreed to the terms without objection, and that I was exercising the clause exactly as it was written. She also filed a counterclaim against the HOA for harassment, abuse of process, and declaratory relief, confirming that my property was exempt from the CC and Articus. The judge assigned to the case was a no-nonsense woman in her 60s named Judge Marion Fletcher. The preliminary hearing was set for mid-November, just 3 weeks before the easement revocation would take effect. Rachel told me that judges generally hated HOA cases because they were almost always petty and time-consuming, but they also tended to be sticklers for property rights. The hearing was in the Deschutes County Courthouse, a modern building with too much glass and not enough parking. I wore a suit and tie, which felt strange given that I spent most of my time in jeans and work boots. Patricia was there with her lawyers, 2 men in expensive suits who looked like they billed $800 an hour. The gallery was packed with residents from Pinewood Springs, many of whom glared at me as I walked in. Judge Fletcher reviewed the filings quickly, peering over her reading glasses at both sides. "Counsel, this seems relatively straightforward. Mr. Grayson has an easement agreement with a revocation clause. He has exercised that clause. Where is the legal issue?" Patricia's lead attorney, a man named Gregory Whitman, stood up. "Your Honor, the issue is that the revocation clause is being used in bad faith as a weapon to coerce the HOA into abandoning legitimate enforcement of our covenants. This is an abuse of rights. Is the revocation clause valid? We believe it is unconscionable and should be voided." "On what grounds?" "The potential harm to the community far outweighs any legitimate interest Mr. Grayson has in revoking the easement. He is not revoking it because the lines interfere with his use of the property. He is revoking it as retaliation." Judge Fletcher turned to Rachel. "Counselor, Your Honor, the revocation clause explicitly allows for revocation if activities benefiting from the easement materially interfere with Mr. Grayson's use and enjoyment of his property. The HOA has been fining him illegally for making improvements to his land. That is textbook interference. Moreover, the HOA has no authority over Mr. Grayson's property in the first place. His parcel predates the subdivision and was never bound by the CC and Articus. We have filed a counterclaim for declaratory relief on that issue as well." "Let me see the formation documents," Judge Fletcher said. A clerk handed her a folder. She read in silence for several minutes while the courtroom waited. Finally, she looked up. "Mr. Whitman, it appears that Mr. Grayson's property was explicitly excluded from the HOA covenants when the association was formed. Can you point me to any document where he or his predecessor agreed to be bound by your rules?" Whitman shuffled his papers. "Your Honor, the exclusion language is ambiguous. It refers to certain properties that may be subject to different standards, but it does not provide a blanket exemption. I am reading it right now, counselor, and it seems quite clear. Properties existing prior to the subdivision plat, and not included in the plat itself, are not bound by the covenants unless the owner voluntarily agrees in writing. Do you have such an agreement? No, Your Honor, but then what are you fining him for? The Architectural Review Committee made a determination based on authority they do not have. Ms. Torres, I am inclined to grant summary judgment on your counterclaim. Mr. Grayson's property is not subject to the HOA's CC and Artiques. The fines are void. Patricia made a strangled noise from the gallery. I kept my expression neutral, but inside I was celebrating. As for the easement revocation, Judge Fletcher continued, I see no grounds to void the clause or to issue an injunction. The agreement is clear. Mr. Grayson has the right to revoke with 90 days' notice. He has provided that notice. Pacific Power is the proper party to negotiate any extension or alternative, not the HOA. Your Honor, Whitman said desperately, the impact on the community is not my concern. This is a property rights issue, and the law is on Mr. Grayson's side. If the HOA wanted to avoid this situation, they should not have harassed him with illegal fines. Motion for injunction denied. Summary judgment granted to defendant on the counterclaim. The HOA will cease all enforcement actions against Mr. Grayson's property immediately, and will issue a written acknowledgment that his property is exempt from the covenants. Any fines assessed are voided, and the HOA is ordered to pay Mr. Grayson's legal fees. We are adjourned. The gavel came down with a sharp crack. Patricia's face was purple. She stood up and actually shouted at the judge. This is outrageous. You are condemning 140 families to Miss Holbrook. One more word and I will hold you in contempt. Sit down. Patricia sat, trembling with rage. I left the courtroom with Rachel, ignoring the stares and muttered insults from the crowd. That went well, Rachel said once we were outside. She is not going to let this go. Probably not. But legally you have won. The easement revocation is still on track, though. I know. Are you really going to go through with it? I thought about Carol Winters and her mother, about the man whose daughter needed the CPAP machine, about all the families who were caught in the middle of this fight. I do not want to, but I am not going to give in now. Patricia needs to understand that actions have consequences. Rachel nodded slowly. Just be careful. Winning in court does not make you safe from people who feel desperate. She was right. The next 2 weeks were the worst yet. My house was egged 3 times. Someone dumped a truckload of manure on my driveway at 3 in the morning. I installed security cameras and caught a man trying to cut down one of my solar panels with a reciprocating saw. The police arrested him, and it turned out to be a resident named Frank Delgado who lived 4 streets over. He was charged with vandalism and trespassing. The local news coverage intensified. A Portland TV station sent a crew out to interview me and Patricia. I agreed to it, figuring I needed to tell my side of the story. The reporter, a young woman with perfectly styled hair and a concerned expression, interviewed me in front of my house. Mr. Grayson, critics say you are using your legal rights as a weapon to punish your entire neighborhood. How do you respond to that? I am defending my property. The HOA fined me thousands of dollars for installing solar panels on land I own outright. They had no authority to do that, which a judge has now confirmed. I tried to resolve this reasonably, but they refused. The easement revocation is the only leverage I have. But what about the families who will be without power? The children, the elderly, people with medical needs. I am not the one putting them at risk. Patricia Holbrook and the HOA board could end this today by simply acknowledging what the court has already ruled, that my property is exempt. But they would rather see their neighbors suffer than admit they were wrong. The interview with Patricia was something else. She sat in her perfectly decorated living room with her hands folded, the picture of reasonable concern. "Mr. Grayson is a bully," she said. "He is using a legal technicality to hold our entire community hostage. Yes, the HOA made some mistakes in how we handled the initial dispute, but that does not justify what he is doing now. He could simply drop the easement revocation and let cooler heads prevail, but he refuses. That tells you everything you need to know about his character." When the piece aired that night, it was clear who the villain was supposed to be. The editing made me look cold and legalistic, while Patricia came across as a concerned neighbor trying to protect her community. The comments section online was brutal, but something shifted a few days later. A resident named Thomas Chen, no relation to the guy from Pacific Power, published an op-ed in the Bend Bulletin that went viral. Thomas was a retired engineer who had lived in Pinewood Springs since the beginning. His editorial was titled, "HOA Overreach Created This Crisis." He wrote, "I have watched Patricia Holbrook turn our homeowners association into a petty fiefdom where she enforces rules selectively to punish people she does not like. Yannick Grayson is not the villain here. He is a property owner who was harassed with illegal fines, and when he pushed back, the HOA doubled down instead of admitting they were wrong. The judge confirmed what many of us already knew. The HOA had no authority over his land. Now we are all paying the price for Patricia's ego. If she had simply apologized and rescinded the fines back in September, none of this would be happening. Instead, she chose to fight a battle she could not win, and now she is blaming Mr. Grayson for her own mistakes. It is time for Patricia Holbrook to resign." The op-ed changed the narrative. Suddenly, my phone was ringing with supportive calls instead of threatening ones. A group of residents organized a recall petition to remove Patricia from the HOA board. The petition needed 40% of homeowners to sign, and it was gathering signatures fast. Patricia responded by digging in harder. She sent out a mass email to all HOA members claiming that Thomas Chen and others were part of a coordinated campaign to destroy the HOA, and that I had orchestrated the whole thing. It was paranoid and unhinged, and it only made more people sign the recall petition. Meanwhile, the 90-day deadline was approaching fast. Pacific Power had been working frantically to find an alternative route for the power lines, but it was slow going. They needed easements from multiple property owners, and not everyone was willing to cooperate without significant compensation. Douglas Chen called me regularly with updates. "We are not going to make the December 15th deadline," he said during one call. "Best case, we will have a temporary solution by late January, but that is going to require running lines along the main road and setting up a bunch of step-down transformers. It is not ideal, and it is going to cost us about $2 million. Can you do anything faster?" "Not unless you agree to extend the revocation deadline." What would Pacific Power need for me to make that happen? Honestly, 6 more months would give us time to do this properly. We could bury the lines, which would be better for everyone, but that is a big ask. Let me think about it. That night I sat down and did some hard thinking. I had won. The court had ruled in my favor. The HOA was in chaos and Patricia's recall was all but certain. The question was, what did I really want out of this? I did not want to hurt my neighbors. I never had. But I also could not let the HOA get away with what they had tried to do to me. There needed to be accountability. The next morning, I called Rachel and asked her to draft a settlement agreement. Then I called Douglas Chen at Pacific Power, and told him I was willing to extend the easement revocation deadline by 6 months under certain conditions. Finally, I sent an email to Patricia and the HOA board offering to meet. Patricia responded with a curt "fine." Tomorrow at 7 p.m. at the community center. The meeting was tense. Patricia sat across the table from me with 2 board members, a man named Steve Hoffman and a woman named Diana Pierce. Both of them looked exhausted. Rachel sat next to me with a folder full of documents. "Let us get to it," I said. "Here is what I am willing to do. I will extend the easement revocation deadline by 6 months, giving Pacific Power time to relocate the lines properly. In exchange, the HOA will do the following. First, issue a formal written apology for the illegal fines and harassment. Second, acknowledge in writing that my property is permanently exempt from all HOA covenants and regulations. Third, pay my legal fees, which currently total $8,300. And fourth, Patricia Holbrook resigns as HOA president effective immediately." Patricia's face went red. "Absolutely not. I am not resigning." "Then the revocation stands," I said calmly. "December 15th, the power goes off." Steve Hoffman spoke up. "Yannick, be reasonable. Patricia has made mistakes, but forcing her to resign is vindictive." Vindictive would be refusing to extend the deadline at all. I am offering everyone a way out of this, but I am not going to allow Patricia to remain in a position where she can continue to abuse her authority. The recall petition is going to succeed anyway. This just speeds up the inevitable. Diana Pierce looked at Patricia. "He is right. We have the numbers. The recall is going to pass. If you resign now, at least you can say it was your choice." Patricia stood up abruptly. "I am not going to sit here and be humiliated. This is extortion, plain and simple." "It is negotiation," Rachel said. "And it is a very reasonable offer considering how badly you messed this up." Patricia grabbed her purse and stormed out. Steve and Diana exchanged a look. "Give us 24 hours, Steve said. "We need to consult with the rest of the board." "You have until tomorrow at noon," I said. "After that, the offer expires." They called the next morning at 11. Steve was on the line with Diana and 2 other board members. "We accept your terms," Steve said. "Patricia submitted her resignation an hour ago. We will have the written agreements ready for your review by end of business today. And the apology, we will send it out to all residents along with an explanation of what happened. We owe the community that much." "Good. I will have Rachel review the documents, and once everything is signed, I will submit the extension notice to Pacific Power." It took another week to finalize everything, but by early December, it was done. The HOA issued a formal apology, not just to me but to the entire community, acknowledging that they had overstepped their authority and that their actions had caused the current crisis. Patricia's resignation was announced, and Steve Hoffman took over as interim president. My property's exemption was recorded with the county as a permanent deed restriction, meaning no future HOA could ever try to enforce rules on my land. And I filed the extension with Pacific Power, giving them until mid-June to relocate the power lines. The neighborhood's reaction was mixed. Some people were relieved. Others still blamed me for creating the mess in the first place. But the death threats stopped, and no one vandalized my property again. Patricia, for her part, seemed to vanish. Her house went up for sale in January, and she moved out before the end of the month. I heard through the grapevine that she relocated to Arizona. I did not waste any energy worrying about her. Thomas Chen stopped by one afternoon in February with a bottle of wine. "Wanted to thank you," he said. "You did something a lot of us did not have the guts to do." Patricia needed to be stopped. "I just wanted to install solar panels," I said. "This got way out of hand." Maybe. But sometimes things need to get out of hand before they get better. The new board is already talking about reforming the CC and RTCS, making them less restrictive. A few of us are even pushing to make the HOA voluntary. It is a long shot, but at least people are asking the right questions. We sat on my deck and drank the wine, watching the sun set over the mountains. The solar panels hummed quietly above us, doing exactly what they were supposed to do. By June, Pacific Power had completed the relocation. They ended up running the new lines underground along the main subdivision roads, which was more expensive but also more reliable. The old lines that had crossed my property were removed, and the easement was formally terminated. I received a check from Pacific Power for $25,000 as compensation for the inconvenience and to release any potential claims. I used part of it to pay Rachel's final bill and donated the rest to a local charity that helped low-income families with energy costs. Life slowly returned to normal. The new HOA board was much more reasonable. They sent out a survey asking residents what rules they actually cared about and started the process of rewriting the CC and RTCS to focus on basic property maintenance rather than micromanaging everyone's lives. Several residents followed my lead and installed solar panels of their own without any pushback. I even made peace with Carol Winters. She came by one Saturday morning and apologized for some of the things she had said during the height of the conflict. "I was scared for my mom," she said. "I was not thinking clearly." "I understand," I said. "I am glad everything worked out. Your solar panels look good, by the way. How much are you saving on electricity?" "About $200 a month. They will pay for themselves in 7 years. Think your installer would give me a quote?" I gave her the number. In September, almost exactly a year after the whole mess started, I got a call from a reporter at a national publication that was doing a story on HOA abuse. They had heard about what happened in Pinewood Springs and wanted to interview me. "I do not know," I said. "I am kind of done being in the news." "I understand. But your story is important. A lot of people are dealing with overreaching HOAs, and they do not know they have options. What you did standing up for your rights even when it was difficult, that is something people need to hear about." I agreed to the interview, and the article ran a few weeks later. It was fair and balanced, and it included interviews with Thomas Chen, Steve Hoffman, and even some of the residents who had been critical of me during the conflict, but had since changed their minds. The article went viral, and for a few days, my phone rang nonstop with interview requests and messages of support from people all over the country who were fighting their own battles with HOAs. One message stood out. It was from a man in Florida named Robert who wrote, "I have been fined $6,000 by my HOA for painting my house the wrong shade of beige. I have been thinking about just paying it to make the problem go away, but after reading your story, I decided to fight. Thank you for showing me that it is possible to win. That made everything worthwhile. As for me, I am still in my house on Ridgeline Drive, still enjoying my solar panels and still very much exempt from HOA rules. I have added a workshop, a greenhouse, and a chicken coop, none of which required anyone's approval but my own. The new HOA board sent me a fruit basket when they officially took over, which I thought was a nice touch. Sometimes I see new residents moving into the neighborhood, and I wonder if they know the story of what happened here. Probably not. Neighborhood drama fades fast. But the changes that came from it, the reforms and the shift in how people think about property rights and community governance, those are going to last. I learned a lot from the whole experience. I learned that standing up for what is right is not always popular. I learned that people will often side with authority, even when that authority is wrong. simply because it is easier than challenging the status quo. And I learned that sometimes, when you are backed into a corner, the most effective response is not to fight harder but to change the rules of the game entirely. The electrical easement was my nuclear option, and using it was risky and controversial, but it worked. It forced everyone involved to confront the underlying issue, that the HOA had overstepped its authority and needed to be reined in. If I had just paid the fines or spent years fighting in court, nothing would have changed. Patricia would still be president, the HOA would still be abusing its power, and I would be out tens of thousands of dollars in legal fees. Instead, I found leverage and used it, not to hurt people but to force accountability. And when I had won, I negotiated a solution that protected everyone's interests while still holding the people responsible for the mess accountable for their actions. It was not perfect. Some people still think I am a jerk, but I can live with that. My property is my own. My solar panels are humming away, saving me money and reducing my carbon footprint, and I do not have to answer to anyone about what I do with my land. That is worth more than being popular. One evening last fall, I was working in my garden when a car pulled up. A young couple got out, looking nervous. The woman was pregnant and the man carried a folder of papers. "Are you Yannick Grayson?" the man asked. "That is me. We are thinking about buying a house in Pinewood Springs. We heard about what happened with the HOA and we wanted to ask you about it. Is it safe to buy here now? Are they still causing problems?" I brushed the dirt off my hands and invited them to sit on my deck. I told them the whole story, not sugar-coating anything, but also explaining how things had changed. I showed them the new CC and Articus, which were reasonable and focused on actual community issues rather than petty aesthetics. I told them about the new board and how they were working to make the HOA a resource rather than a burden. "So you would recommend buying here?" the woman asked. "I would. Just do your homework. Read the covenants carefully. Talk to the board. Know your rights. And if something does not seem right, do not be afraid to push back." They thanked me and left, and I went back to my garden. The sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink. My solar panels glinted in the fading light. Somewhere in the neighborhood, kids were playing in a yard, their laughter carrying on the breeze. It was peaceful. It was home, and I had fought hard to keep it that way. The Pinewood Springs saga taught me that your rights are only as strong as your willingness to defend them. It taught me that institutions, even small ones like an HOA, can become corrupt when no one challenges them. And it taught me that sometimes the right thing to do is also the hardest thing to do. I do not regret any of it. Not the conflict, not the stress, not even the spray paint on my mailbox. Because at the end of the day, I can stand on my property and know that it is truly mine. No one can tell me what color to paint my house, what plants to grow in my garden, or where I can put my solar panels. That freedom, that autonomy, that basic respect for property rights, that is what I was fighting for. And it is what I won. As I write this, it has been nearly 18 months since I received that first certified letter from Patricia Holbrook. The neighborhood has moved on. There is a new family in Patricia's old house, and they seem nice. The HOA holds meetings every month, and they are boring and procedural, exactly the way they should be. No drama, no power trips, just neighbors working together to maintain common areas and address actual problems. My solar panels are producing more energy than I use, and I am selling the excess back to the grid. Pacific Power actually approached me about expanding the array and turning my property into a small-scale solar farm, but I declined. I have had enough excitement for one lifetime. Sometimes, late at night, I think about everything that happened and wonder if I handled it the right way. Could I have been more diplomatic? Should I have tried harder to find a compromise before pulling the nuclear option? Maybe. But I also know that Patricia and the HOA were never going to back down voluntarily. They were counting on me to fold, to pay the fines and shut up like everyone else did. The easement revocation was not my first choice, but it was the only move that actually worked. And the result was not just a win for me. It was a win for everyone who had been intimidated or bullied by the HOA over the years. It broke the spell of fear that Patricia had cast over the neighborhood. It showed people that they could say no, that they had rights, and that sometimes those rights were worth fighting for. So no, I do not have regrets. I did what I had to do, and I would do it again. The garden is producing well this year. Tomatoes, peppers, squash, beans. I have been sharing the excess with my neighbors, the ones who do not still hold a grudge. It is a small gesture, but it helps. Community is not built on rules and regulations. It is built on relationships, on mutual respect, on people looking out for each other. That is what I wanted for Pinewood Springs all along. Not chaos, not division, just a place where people could live their lives without someone constantly looking over their shoulder, ready to fine them for the smallest deviation from arbitrary standards. I think we are getting there. Slowly. But we are getting there. My solar panels continue to hum quietly on the roof, soaking up the Oregon sun and converting it into clean, free energy. Every month, my electric bill is negative, meaning the power company owes me money instead of the other way around. It is a small thing, but it brings me disproportionate joy. Not because of the money, but because of what it represents. Independence, self-sufficiency, freedom from systems that exist to extract value from you while giving back as little as possible. That is what this whole fight was really about. Not solar panels, not easements, not even the HOA really. It was about the fundamental question of who gets to control your property and your life. And my answer then and now is this: I do. That is not selfish. That is not antisocial. That is the foundation of a free society. People owning their own land, making their own decisions, and living with the consequences of those choices. When we give up that autonomy in exchange for someone else's vision of how things should be, we give up something essential. Patricia Hallbrook and the old HOA board forgot that. They thought the rules were more important than the people they served. They thought their aesthetic preferences justified trampling on someone's property rights. And when challenged, they doubled down instead of admitting they were wrong. That is the real danger of organizations like HOAs. Not the rules themselves, which can be reasonable, but the tendency of the people running them to become petty tyrants. Give someone a little power and watch how quickly they abuse it. It is human nature. The only antidote is accountability and limits on that power. The fight I went through established those limits for Pinewood Springs. The new CC and Articus include provisions for dispute resolution, term limits for board members, and a much clearer process for amending the rules. It is not perfect, but it is better. And my property stands as a reminder of what existed before the HOA, a piece of land that operates under its own terms. I like to think it keeps them honest, knowing that at least one person in the neighborhood does not have to play by their rules. The story of what happened here has taken on a life of its own. People reference it in online forums about HOA disputes. Lawyers cite the case in arguments about easement rights and property law. I even heard that a law school professor uses it as a teaching example in a class on property and community governance. I never intended to become a symbol or a cautionary tale. I just wanted to install some solar panels. But life has a way of taking our small choices and amplifying them into something larger. If there is a lesson in all of this, it is this: know your rights, stand up for them, and do not be afraid to use every tool at your disposal when someone tries to take them away. But also, once you have won, be gracious enough to find a solution that works for everyone. I could have let the power stay off. I could have forced Pacific Power to reroute everything on the original timeline and left my neighbors without electricity for months. That would have been legal. But it would have been cruel, and cruelty was never the point. The point was justice, accountability, respect. And once I got those things, I had no interest in punishing people who were just caught in the crossfire. That is how you win without losing yourself in the process. As I sit here now, looking out at my property with its solar panels gleaming and my garden flourishing, I feel a deep sense of satisfaction. Not because I beat Patricia Holbrook or the HOA, though I did, but because I proved to myself that I could stand up for what was right, even when it was hard, even when everyone was against me, even when it would have been easier to just give in. That is the real victory, not the legal judgments or the settlement agreements, but the knowledge that when it mattered, I did not back down. And that is a lesson that will stay with me for the rest of my life. Your property, your rights, your freedom, these things are precious. They are worth fighting for, and sometimes the fight is the whole point.